Hey, everybody, it's Alan Wiederhold. This is Numa, the crossroad of science and enlightenment. And I'm excited. I have a really awesome guest with me today, Casey Kang. We connected a month and a half ago on Facebook, right?
We did. We did, in
Yeah.
fact.
So tell me a little about your story. When we were talking, I was like, wow, there's like, I always think it's so cool because like you get these messages from people and you're like, there's a synchronous moment. And like something jumps out and you're like, wow, okay, there's something definitely there. And then we connect. I'm like, okay, got it. Like I
Yeah.
kind of joke now, I just go. Like I go where I'm supposed to go.
Right. I feel like the universe has plans for us, and we just have to accept the message that it sends to us and lean into it instead of going like, I don't think so.
Yeah. Now, so you're a fighter. I mean, you are. This is like, so I want to hear your story, but that I think is one of the things that really gravitated to me was the story of. I mean, you're like a fighter.
Yeah. So I'm a 3-time cancer survivor and a stroke survivor. I'm It started 10 years ago, in 2014, but it probably started long before that. I had a very traumatic childhood that led into making decisions based on, I wouldn't say bad programming, but old programming. And that led to, ultimately being diagnosed at 31 and having a life-changing experience, to say the least.
So when you and hopefully we can get into this if we can't, just tell me. So when you like when you say childhood trauma, the reason I asked because like you and I just before we got on the show, I'm very open about my life. It's it's a good and a bad thing, I guess. Someone once said I like to live in a fishbowl. I don't, but I what I've learned is that just by being able to talk about it, it has given other people permission to talk about it as well. So trauma, like, talk to me about because I know we talked a little bit about this when we were getting to know each other.
Yeah, so my parents divorced around the time I was 8 years old, and my mother ended up marrying this man who, it felt like he had it out for my brother and I. He was physically, mentally, emotionally abusive up until I left the house, basically, at 18. Well, not 18, after I graduated high school and I could leave the house, because it was every day woke up feeling like a knife fight. Like, how am I gonna survive and get through this day so I can get to the next day? And the sad part is that I didn't even realize that it was abuse until I started therapy during my cancer journey. And my therapist goes, "That's abuse." And I had zero idea that what he was what he did would be considered abuse, physical, mental, and emotional. I had like zero idea.
And it's like you never know it when you're in it.
No,
Yeah.
right?
So this like you held on to all of this. Like, did you ever tell anyone?
No, honestly, I did not. My friends kind of knew what was going on, but they didn't know the full depth and scope of what he was doing. And my, my dad, I finally told my dad why I'll never speak to my mother again, which I have not spoken to her in over 20 years. I finally told him the truth a few years ago, and he just goes, "I hope if I ever see her again." And I was like, "It's not like it's over. It's fine. Like,
Hmm.
I'm okay." He had no idea because I was so terrified that if I told him what was going on, that I would lose him as a parent as well, and I'd have no one.
So we were talking about this before the show, and it's such a crazy thought process because I know that for me, my whole life I didn't tell anyone I was abused. So when I think it was like 4 years ago, like I had like here I'm like in my 50s, and I had created all these goals and all these incredible things, and you accomplish all these things, and then you're not happy. And my wife, like who I met in college, she's like, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. You don't love yourself. There's something wrong. And I remember we were doing this couples journal, and it was like, what's the biggest secret you've never told?
Mm.
And I just blurted it out. Like, I was sexually abused. And I remember she looked at me like that. It was like, I've never heard this before. And I'm like, I've never told anyone. But then you tell your parents, and then you kind of worried, like, you know, what is their reaction going to be? Because I know, at least I could see it in their faces. It was guilt. It was all these questions of how could I have prevented it from happening? Probably a lot of what your dad might have been feeling. And in my psychedelic experience a year and a half ago, we were going to talk about this during the show. I actually relived it. I relived it 3 times. And I was in the room, I could see it, I could feel, I cried, I would say, I don't want to go back into that room. Please don't make me go. And then the third time I was actually there and he was on the bed with me crying, and I was the one confronting him, forgiving him. Like, it was the strangest thing, like, because now he's telling me that it was done to him and I saw him in a different light. And I didn't know what to do with that. So, I come home, and 6 weeks later, we were talking about this before the show. I was driving down the road and I hear this voice find him. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. And I did. And I called him and I forgave him. And I just found out over the weekend that he died of a liver condition that my whole family has. And we'll talk about that in a second. So I'm Hispanic, and we have this gene thing. But you have some ancestral stuff that on top of that too.
Yeah, so I'm half Japanese and half Dutch, Polish, and German. My dad is Japanese, and my grandmother was in a Japanese internment camp when she was a little girl. She born and raised in Sacramento, California, until what their family had was taken away, which was land, a business, a life. So her and her 3 sisters and their parents, great grandparents, were put in 3 different internment camps. And after that, when everyone was released, which there are 323,000, I think, survivors of it, she migrated with her family up to Chicago, which is where I'm from. And to have these conversations with my grandmother, I didn't know she was even, or maybe I did know, but didn't know until probably I was a teenager when I realized. I was like, wait a minute, time out. You were in
Wow.
this? And she goes, yes, but we don't talk about it and we move on. Like, she was a lockbox of secrets and
Mm.
trauma that she just held onto until the day she died. And I remember a few years before she died, which was, I think, about 2 years ago now. So, like, probably like 4 or 5 years ago, we're sitting at Christmas dinner, and I go, but our family doesn't talk about stuff like that, blah, 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 like casually. And my grandmother, without skipping a beat, goes, yeah, we don't talk about it. It happens and we move on. I was like, woof, what are
Whoa.
you carrying with you?
Wow. And I remember when we met, I was like, I know what I'm calling this show. We don't want to talk about it. Because I remember my family was the same way. Like, everything was a secret. No one needs to know our business, because I think that's just how it was back in those days. My dad was in Vietnam. Never talk about it. Like, and my daughter is reading a book right now. She was a child in Vietnam, wrote a book. She's here in the U.S., talks about Saigon, all this stuff. And we were just talking about this last night. I'm like, yeah, I don't know anything about my dad's experience. But that had to be hard, because if you're growing up in the we don't talk about it, you've got this thing going on with your stepdad, and you're not talking about it. How does that show up in other areas?
I mean, it felt like I was the problem. Like, I took on, like, "Oh, it's gotta be me. Like, I'm obviously the issue here," because that's how it was made to feel. It was made to feel like, "You're the problem. If you weren't here, the solution would be, like, we'd all be fine." And so there was a lot of blame, a lot of shame, a lot of living in fear of, like, getting in trouble, or if I do tell someone, like, what's gonna happen because I'm not supposed to talk about it, and, you know, but yet put on this brave face and look at make it seem as though from the outside world, everything's okay and copacetic.
Got it all covered.
Yep, yep, and I'm, like, internally struggling to points that I was just questioning, like, life. Like
Mm. So now, when you were diagnosed the first time,
mhm.
were you in a relationship? Were you married? You were.
Yeah, I was married. We had been married for almost 2 years.
Huh.
At that point, we were together for 5, and
Okay.
it was extremely life-changing for both of us. When I was diagnosed initially, I was in the hospital, I go, "You didn't sign up for this." I go, I would not blame you. I would not be mad at you if you didn't wanna do this with me." I gave him the out because I'm like, "You no one signed up for this." Like, um,
But he didn't
and
take it though.
he didn't take it. I offered it when I had my stroke. He didn't take it 'cause then, because we didn't know, like, how much I would gain back. They
Yeah.
just kept saying, "We don't know." So I was like, "You didn't sign up for, like, a half paralyzed person, so, like, if you don't wanna participate,
And
like,
I would
you"
argue he did, for better or worse.
right? But you don't know because you don't
Yeah,
expect
I've
worse.
been, yeah.
So then the 3rd time was after I relapsed the first time, and I said, "Really, you didn't sign up for this, like, it's okay, I get, like, we're already on almost year 2, we're going on year 2, like, you didn't sign up for this." I go, "I didn't even sign up for this," and,
Yeah.
and he goes, "No," and I go, "Okay, then you're in, you're stuck for, like, the rest of the duration of it." I
Yeah.
go, "There's no out anymore."
Wow. That is so cool because I have heard so many. I mean, we talk about this too. My wife was like, I don't love you. I love you. I'll always be in love with you. I mean, no, I will always love you, but I am not in love with you. You don't love yourself. But you need to go figure it out. But
Yeah.
she's never gonna leave. Like, fortunately, I got to find myself.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think cool.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the 2nd time was when it got really scary, and we had to write a letter of compassion to the FDA and drug manufacturer for compassionate care because I ran out of options, and they were like, "Well," I was told when I left the hospital, like, "Settle your affairs." And so I was like, "Wow, okay, this is real." Like, I planned a funeral, I had really hard conversations with people, and there was, like, an inkling of, like, "This isn't how you die inside of me." Like, it was a weird feeling. I'm like, I planned all the things, I prepared for all the things, but I literally there was, like, this knowing inside of me that was like, "This isn't how you die." It's a and I've asked other people who've been in similar situations, like, "How did you feel?" They're like, "The same." They're like, "We just knew," like, I just knew it wasn't time yet. It's, like, a weird feeling that until you're there,
Hmm.
you can't words don't even make sense.
So I've always heard people say to live your life in purpose, write your eulogy.
Mm,
But you did. You planned a funeral.
I did. And you wanna know what? Like, the things that I thought about weren't the vacations or the things that I had, like, physically. It was the life that wasn't going to be lived and finished.
Huh.
It was all the things that I couldn't get to do. Not regrets, it was what the life that wasn't going to get lived.
So I heard a quote. I read a quote this morning, and I can't remember where I read it. It was something like, the only people who aren't going to remember that you worked weekends and nights are your family, or something like that. Like, I was like, wow, yeah, because I remember early days, like career was like the most important thing, and then you kind of keep moving. Yeah. So tell me about that, because I know we've kind of talked about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I the same thing, like people pleasing, high achiever, like just trying to white knuckle through life. And, as a byproduct of the way I was raised, it was like the only attention I got was when I got the gold star or the award. And so I was like, okay, so now I have to like achieve all these things to get the acknowledgement and the love that I'm desperate for. And so that led to working 50 hours a week. I had a 2+ hour daily commute. I literally would wake up at 5 in the morning, come home sometimes 7:30, 8 o'clock, eat dinner, and go right to bed. It was like
Wow.
I like literally worked for the weekends. And I never ever said no to anything outside of those hours, right? Like, so if we had a charity event or a work function, I never said once in 10 years. Never. I didn't know you even could.
So you plan this funeral.
Mhm.
You start to realize that things maybe are more important than what working 50 hours, 2-hour commutes. And so walk me through that transition. Like how, like I know what mine looked like, and it's always kind of fascinating. And I love to read and I love statistics. 71% of people, executives and entrepreneurs who have a psychedelic or a meaningful life experience, end up chucking the old version of their lives out because they don't work anymore.
And that statistic's probably spot on, because that life didn't work for me anymore. And when I was contemplating going back and going like, I can come into the office again, but I wanna work from home, right? Like, I'm ready to go back to work, but I wanna work from home, and it took me 6 months to work up the courage to even ask for that, because I felt like they weren't gonna say yes. And, I mean, this is before COVID, so no one was working from home really like they do now.
Right.
And of course, it was the one point of contention we couldn't agree on. They still wanted me once a week in the office, sometimes twice a week. And I said, I don't think you guys are quite understand then. I'm I'm not ready to come back then yet. And then instead of having a conversation again, they basically let me go for, you know,
Mm.
lack of a better word. And it was devastating in that moment to be let go, but then at the same time, I was like, I could breathe again, and it was gave me the permission that I needed to figure out what I wanted to do.
Sometimes that's like the most scary time when, and it's always, I'm always like amazed that we have these fears, I guess, for lack of stories, it would probably be a better
Mhm.
word, of how things are going to be. Like we naturally gravitate to the worst possible thing that's going to happen. And oh my gosh, and it never really kind of works that way. And I've heard stories like, so we were building our house, and our interior decorator was in a really bad marriage, left in the middle of the night with 2 kids, and built this design company, like because she had to. And you just meet these incredible people along the way who do these things because they have to. And so it's like your situation. Like, they're like, all right, hey, you're not going to stay here. And now you got to go. You have a decision.
Right.
Like,
Like,
you can go work for someone else. So what happened?
so what I realized in that time that we were going back and forth so much of like coming back to work, trying like what does that look like? I ended up sharing more organically on social media, like the struggle of it, like how the fear and the anxiety was debilitating, and how all of these things that I'd figured out like solutions for, like, okay, well, how do you actually rewire your nervous system so you're not always scared and afraid all the time? And consumed with the thought, like, oh my God, my cancer is going to come back every single day. The more I shared, the more women were reaching out and going, like, but how did you do it? And I was like, literally manually typing away on my little phone. And finally, like, I was like, this isn't efficient. And this isn't like, this is taking forever to explain what I've been doing. So I kind of like put it together and I was like, I got an email. And then I put it together in a Word doc. And then after a while, more and more women, I was like, this isn't efficient either. Like, because I'm literally sending out manual emails. And I'm like, so then I was like, there's software out there. So I'm like, okay, let's like see if we can actually build it in a platform to like where I don't have to do all this manual work. And then that's kind of how it was born. And it was all just people wanting to know how I did what I did. And I was like, because I don't live in fear. I don't, I wouldn't, if I lived in fear, I'd still be working in corporate America, white knuckling life, right? Like
50 hours a week.
yeah. Yeah, and for
So
what? For what? Like, just because so I can have money? And granted, like, I did not grow up with money at all. So,
yeah,
like, it was huge for me to achieve that success, to change the story, the narrative.
I'm just thinking of like what a transformation, because we don't talk about that. And then you find yourself talking about that.
Right? It's crazy.
And so what does all this look like? First, I have so many questions. So how do you downregulate? Like how does a person, if they have all this stuff going on, like how what did you put in your book or in your Word document? Like how would I like not have to face those thoughts?
So, I mean, it's more than one thing, first of all. Like,
Okay.
there's not a magic solution or pill that's just gonna make it all better.
Oh wait, I thought we could pill anything.
I
Like I thought
wish.
that I swear I thought you could just take a pill for anything.
I mean, that's what, people want, but sadly, like, that's not how our nervous system works, and that's not how it all operates, so what I found is, like, getting into our body first would turn off the parts of our brain that make us think about things, right? Like, that's fear and anxiety, fight or flight come from, like, that instinctual nature of what we being, like, chased by lions and tigers and bears, but we don't have those anymore, chasing us.
I always it's so funny you say that because I always say the same thing. Because like right now, an email, a commute, a fight with a loved one, those are now the new woolly mammoth, saber-tooth tigers, and yeah,
Yeah, 100%. Like, everyday life is sometimes just as scary. So our nervous system gets activated from our body first, and then our mind is what names it. But when you're stuck in chronic fight or flight for sometimes years at a time, everything's so dysregulated. You're either up, you're down, you're up, you're down. It can't find the median point where you're supposed to be at,
Hmm,
where yes, your stress is normally up and down, but it's in now I'm totally forgetting on the name of the zone that you're supposed to be in, where you're handling everyday life in a
okay,
much more calm manner, peaceful manner. And so I was like, okay, so if it's from our body, what if movement? So like exercise, yoga, mindful movement
yeah,
practices are actually what help turn our bodies, our brains off. When we are able to turn our brains off, that's when we can go in through mantra and meditation and other things to then basically rewire our nervous system to go, those dots that were connected before need to be reconnected to these ones instead. But you do have to get into your body in some form or fashion, either through breath work, yoga, movement, because when we move, you might notice this now going forward, we don't think about anything but what we're doing.
yeah. And I feel like in the West we're especially really bad at that because it is like the have do. be, where other cultures it's really more of a be, you, have. And everything is just so backwards for us. So I have a tattoo of the Eye of Horus on my arm because it is basically the pine shaped gland in our little bean is really kind of how we downregulate. So the parasympathetic and autonomic nervous systems is what you're referring. And so when I went down this gigantic rabbit hole of neuroscience because I was just fascinated. For me, it started off using psychedelic assisted therapy was kind of what my starting point was. But I agree, like meditation
Mhm.
is really where you have to really spend time in stillness
Yeah.
and learning how to be.
Yeah, and trust me, like, someone suggested I start meditation, and so I don't know what I was thinking, but I sat down, I put the timer on my phone for 20 minutes.
Oh Lord, first time.
Yep,
Oh
first
wow.
time. So I sit down, I'm doing it. I look at my phone, 30 sec not even 30 seconds, I think it was 28 seconds went by, and I was like, "Oh my god, how do people do this?"
I was the same way. So I don't think when I started meditating, I don't think I could do 2 minutes.
Right? Like, and so now I can do 20 minutes, I've done it, I don't typically do it on a daily basis, but it's one of the best things that I think you can do for yourself, and it doesn't take a lot, like, normally, I only do, like, 5 minutes, but 5 minutes a day for 4 weeks, and you can gain the benefits of those 20-minute sessions, and
Wow.
it's wild, it's all research has been coming out just more and more reinforcing that fact of all you need is 5 minutes for 4 weeks to gain and reap the rewards.
Wow. So what are we doing now? So we have all of these women who have approached us
Mhm.
and you put together a coaching program, it sounds like. So
Yeah.
coaching. Is it a specific kind of person? Because I know at the very, very beginning you said you talked about programming, which I love because all of us are running on a program.
Right.
I was reading a book called Practicing the Way, and the author says, what's the very first thing you do in the morning?
Mm.
Because that's what you're a disciple of. We're all a disciple of something. And normally that will tell you what it is. It's kind of an interesting thought.
It's an interesting question too. I mean,
Yeah.
technically, I go to the bathroom first, so
So
then I
yeah.
drink a glass of water and I sit and I journal and eat breakfast.
Okay.
That's what I do.
Disciple of your bladder.
I am technically, like, I pee all the time.
Well, that means you're hydrated. That's actually really good.
Yeah.
Because I heard like 60% of people are chronically dehydrated.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
yeah, and
insane.
then the more you hydrate with water, the more electrolytes are imbalanced, and, like, people don't understand, like, when you hydrate, you have to also add some electrolytes to your
So that's I didn't mean to so I created this hydrate
well,
actually that
perfect
is
segue.
I didn't really mean to do that. But yeah, so I same thing. So I actually found a bunch of things that were essential for brain health because I had learned through all this neuroscience stuff
Yeah.
that yeah, so it has 4 times the electrolytes of anything on the market, but it actually has a bunch of stuff for brain health. But I didn't mean to make that infomercial there at all. I promise that was not the intent. But are they cancer survivors? Are they programming people who are like just tired of the programming? Like, how are, yeah.
Yeah, so I work with women who are either fighting or survivors, and they're really struggling with that fear, that anxiety, but also, like, when you're in a precarious position where you're like, "Well, I'm always gonna be on some form of drug to prevent this or keep it stable or maintenance meds," as I like to call them. How do I live with disease, right? So, I work with everyone in every stage because everyone hits the breaking point where they're like, "I need support and I need someone who understands what I'm going through." And from a realistic standpoint, I I'm like, if your diet, you can't sustain it for your life, then it's not the right diet, right? Like, we have to figure out what's gonna support us for our life, not just like temporarily so we get through this situation to the next situation, but it's really about overhauling the lifestyle, reducing stress, finding the right diet, an exercise plan that actually works for you so you can maintain it and maintain a healthy weight because that's one of the pillars of preventing cancer. And everything's based on principles with me because not one diet is ever going to work for everyone.
Right.
But if we can take the core beliefs and like these are the cancer fighting foods that we need to incorporate more into our diet, you're going to get way further ahead than if you're just like, I'm so strict and rigid. And then you fail and like or give up or fatigue after like a year. Well, that's not going to support you forever. So I'm really about teaching women tools to live a healthier, happier lifestyle. And a lot of that does go back into the programming of perfectionists, all or nothing, people pleasers. Like you're not prioritizing your own care when you just went through something so significant. And yet you still don't want to spend 20 minutes exercising for yourself to make yourself feel better. Like it's like wild. So like those old programs need to be updated. We need an
And it's so
upgrade.
funny because as you're saying it, I'm thinking a lot of the listeners will be like, that's not even a program. I just don't want to work out. But in reality, it is because you're not even taking 20 minutes to do something for yourself. And
Mhm.
you see that a lot with like wives and moms and women where they put everyone else first and like they like are the silent martyr.
100%. Or they don't feel like they're worth it or deserving because of after what they're putting their families through currently. And so it really is about shifting the narrative of like, do you realize like your kids would rather have you here and you taking care of yourself for 20 minutes than not have you at all? Like, what are you
And it's
talking
almost
about?
such a selfish way of thinking because you don't think like that. You're just trying to survive the day or the hour, and you're not even thinking about the long term because most of us don't have the opportunity to maybe create a funeral or to write a eulogy. Or, I mean, so I think it's so incredibly beautiful that, I mean, one, I love that you survived because we get to have this conversation, but that you had to go through that experience because I feel like if everyone, I'm not telling everyone that they need to go and die, but to almost have that experience to be able to go back and look at programming and just say, I need to write out what my eulogy, what is my purpose? Like, why do I, why am I here? What will the people who love me the most, what will they say about me when I'm gone? 'Cause that's got to be a
Yeah. And it matters. Like I actually had a client probably like 6 months ago ask me and goes, "Are you happy you went through cancer?" And she like immediately was like, "That's not what I meant." I go, "I know what you mean." I go, you're asking me the question if I would have rather not gone through cancer and lived the life that I lived or the life that I have now, even though I had to go through that." And I said, 100%, I would rather be where I'm at, living the life I have now. And that was just my journey of what I had to go through to get there. And it sucked.
And we all have a journey, and some of them are great, some of them not so great. Yeah, yours sucked, but man, you're like, I mean, just I'm learning just by talking and listening, and there are so many other people who will as well. So, what advice do you have for someone that you haven't even met, kind of see them across the street?
For general health
Yeah,
or
yeah,
just life?
yeah. You see somebody, their head kind of down, looking at the ground, and you had an opportunity to walk over. And I guess where I see this is, my wife showed me this video. I'm not a big social media person. She showed me this video. There's this guy. He was standing in the middle of a street with a sign that says "Hugs, free hugs if you need it," and he had a blindfold on. And people were just walking up and hugging and
Yeah.
crying and sharing like their deepest pain. And I feel like in a lot of ways that's what you're, without having the sign or standing in the street or putting the blindfold on, just the vibe that I get is like that's you. Like,
Yeah.
you're approachable and you have a story and you can just feel that.
I honestly would say, have you told the person or people in your life today that you've loved them?
Mm.
Like, and has anyone told you that they love you today? Like, that truly is the people in our lives are the only thing that matters. And I think I had to get to almost dying to figure that out. Because without people, we're nothing. Without our humans, we're nothing.
How do we find you?
On social media, it's at The Happier Hustle. You can find me on LinkedIn and Facebook, Case Gang.
We'll put the show notes. We'll put show notes in here as well on how to find Case Kang. And this was amazing.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
No, you really like. I when we talked, like just we don't talk about it. That really resonated because I grew up with that, and I love that we are talking about. Like,
I love it.
thank you so much for your time today. This is Alan Wiederhold. This is Numa, the crossroad of science and enlightenment.